Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. So, this is episode 2 of Rocket Lab Weekly with Matt Money. So, thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yes, and as I promised, this time we have a little bit more professional setup. I paid for StreamYard so that this is a bit higher quality. And you can see in the background the Launch Complex 1, New Zealand. It's actually a beautiful picture, but we are both in it, so you can't see the. Yeah, anyways, it's an upgrade for the channel. And when it comes to Rocket Lab, it's been a very, very volatile week. We started the week going to the moon, and then we crashed about, I can show the chart, about 14%, according to my charting software here. And the big question is, why did this happen to the stock? And do you think, Matt, that we're going to soon see Rocket Lab in the threes?
Mm. I think it's plausible. I mean, anything is plausible in these days, especially, we have next week, just on Wednesday, we'll have another meeting with the FOMC notes. And with that, I think we'll kind of see whether or not there's another rate hike or how hawkish things might be, or if just the mention of a potential rate hike has kind of put another Fed put onto the market itself. But I think it's just a tough environment, with a lot of non-profitable companies right now, because while Rocket Lab does still have 350 to 400 million dollars plus on their balance sheet in terms of cash they can use, they are not yet profitable. And so until they get to that point, they're kind of at the mercy of the markets when it comes to getting additional debt or anything of the like. And then you also have to recognize, I think you can understand this if you read through the 10Q, that I think it's like January or March of 2024, they have $100 million debt obligation they had to pay back. And so whether or not they just pay that back in cash or whether or not they go to the market and try to renew that debt is something that I think will probably be another piece that will hurt the stock. And so I wouldn't be surprised if that's something that's brought up in the 3Q earnings call here in the next month or so, because $100 million to Rocket Lab is a lot, right? That's several quarters worth of run rate. And if you're not yet profitable, if they just eat that, then that could change the timeline. But if they're able to sustain that and figure out a way to keep that $100 million in cash on the books, then that's obviously something that allows them to operate for another 4 quarters, 5, 6 quarters, depending on what their cash burn is. So, but all that, regardless, will come with higher interest rates if they are able to keep that. And so that's probably being considered as well, recognizing that all that sort of movement will be a hinder on the cash flow going forward. And so it might elongate, how much longer it might be to be profitable. I don't think it'll add, let's just say, tens of millions of dollars a year of interest onto the balance sheet or anything like that, but it'll add a couple $1 million in terms of increased interest that they'll have to pay, which will obviously have to be taken into
Yeah,
consideration.
do you know what interest rate they pay on the interest? I haven't looked into this.
I don't know. We can kind of progress, and I can find it on the 10Q.
Yeah, maybe we take it up next week. I mean, I guess it should be between 6 to 8, something like that. And if it's 100 million, let's say at 8%, that would be 8 million a year. That would be 2 million per quarter. That is, obviously it's not nice, but as long as they become profitable, it's an easily overcome number.
Or is it? Let me see. I think I just had it. Yeah, in 2021, the company entered a $100 million secured term loan agreement with Hercules Capital, maturity date being June 2024. Okay, so it's not January. That's my fault there. And it's secured by the assets of the company. It's 8.15% interest plus the prime rate minus 3.25, payment in kind interest of 1.25. So I'm not really good with all that. It's
Yeah,
8.15. It's a bunch of,
that
but
sounded
anyway,
like a mumbo jumbo.
that was in 2021, and rates were much favorable back then, but the company has come a long way in the last 2 years. So the risk of somebody taking on, debt within Rocket Lab will probably be easier as well. So I'm sure that there's going to be some sort of inflation of the actually not inflation, but the point increase, just based off of the fact that federal interest rates have gone up, but also offsetting that partly by the companies come a lot further, so the risk is less. But that still
Yeah.
being said, as of right now, they have $100 million outstanding that they'll owe in a year's time or so. So that's going to be an issue that we'll have to cross within the next 24 months.
Yeah, that's definitely going to be interesting. We got a comment here. We have 4 live viewers now, but soon we will be in the hundreds watching the live stream. And the reason why I like this comment, or what I wanted to mention on this comment, is what I think sucks about YouTube Finance is whenever you have a company that you can tell me if you agree or disagree with me. But what I noticed, for example, in Palantir, when the price of Palantir was going down and was in the 6s, we had the lowest viewership about the stock and the lowest interest on the retail by the stock, right? And yet that was the most important time to pay attention to what was going with the company, the most important time to be adding to your position. And I feel that this podcast, as long as Rocket Lab is in the 3s and 4s and is going sideways, and now we have been in a downtrend the last I don't know how many months. I think that yes, we will get new viewers, but when the stock is going to go to 10, 20, 30, that's when we will get like an explosion of viewers, but it's not the good time to be following the stock. So it's something that I don't necessarily like about YouTube Finance, but I like to serve the people who are still here, yet the stock price is not going to the moon yet.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I mean, I think this is something that's going to be a long-term hold. I don't think, there might be an opportunity if people are interested. If it pops up to $8 or $9, they could sell it. But I think we'll see a lot of volatility in the stock continued for the next, say, 2-3 years until they truly get to a point where they're profitable. But I think you'll see, and I already have seen, a lot of people starting to really pique their interest with respect to Rocket Lab. You're a newcomer to the space, and I've seen a few others on X become newcomers to the space. And I think that a lot of people, based off of what they've seen SpaceX do, have been kind of turned off by maybe some of the small launch companies, because a lot of them, let's just be honest, were duds and are duds, the ones that are still public. This one's really the only one that's still launching. And so I think that for some reason, I don't know if it's a marketing thing or these guys are more, it's like Palantir, right? It's like everyone's all into Snowflake because of the guy who's at the helm and who's pushing. But at the end of the day, you have people that like Alex Karp and Sham who are actually making real differences and actually creating real software. It's kind of similar to that. It's just like, I'm not saying with reference to SpaceX, because obviously Elon is this kind of guy as well. He gets things done. But when you look at like Astra and Virgin Orbit and all these other kind of companies, it's like they're all big talk and they're all able to market themselves really well, including Relativity. Oh, the first fully 3D printed rocket. But 80% of the parts on Rocket Lab Electron are 3D printed as well. And I think it was actually part of the first 3D, I think it was one of the first, if not the first 3D printed components to actually go into space was Rocket Lab Electron. And so you don't hear that. You don't hear that they've already gotten 40 something launches under their belt. You hear about how excited everyone is for Astra's first launch. It's like these guys have been launching rockets now for over 5 years, but they don't get nearly the love they need. And I think they just get bucketed into the group of all the others. But in reality, I think it's SpaceX is a very high first in terms of being able to launch. ULA is obviously up there as well because they've been doing it for a long time. Rocket Lab is behind them, but up there. And then you have all these other companies that unfortunately I feel like drag Rocket Lab down. But it's also not just the launch company. So
yeah, exactly. I mean, I think what's very tricky with Rocket Lab is SpaceX sucks out all the air from the room. And for me, for a very long time, that is the reason why I never looked at Rocket Lab, because I was like, yeah, SpaceX is the definite king of this sector. And it wasn't until very recently when I took a look and I was like, how's this company still alive? And then, I went more into who the founder is, what they have accomplished, and read Ashley Vance's when the heavens became for sale, or something like that is the title. And I got shocked how competent Peter Beck is, what he has overcome. And I would say that Rocket Lab has reached escape velocity as a company. Like, it's no longer a question of, are they going to survive? Do they have a technology that is there? I know that they technically didn't hit profitability yet, but I feel it's more like you see that it's coming. Like, they have a very good route to get there, as opposed to many other rocket companies that haven't even launched yet. And even if they launched, then it's like, okay, who's going to be the customers? And as Peter Beck has said many times, the 10th rocket is harder to launch than the first one, because the first one, you just take a few engineers, you throw it together, you get a launch pad, and then you launch it. But then the 10th one, it has to be manufactured by, it has to be engineered by a group, and then it has to be passed on and produced by another group, and then it has to be assembled by another group, and then you have to have your own facilities, and those are very, very capital intense. So Rocket Lab is really, really, I would say 95% into escape velocity, and the heavy lifting has been done. So it's not nearly as risky as many people would think that it is. Cool. So then another thing that happened this week is Rocket Lab announced earnings. This is going to be on November 8th, I think after the bell. And it's going to be very exciting. I don't know if you would be up to a live stream at that time. We can take it later. I don't know if it would fit you in any way. Oh, we lost you. You're muted.
That's my fault. Wednesdays might be tough, but if it's after market at like 5:30 or something like that, then maybe I'll be able to do it. We'll see.
Okay. Yeah, we talk about it. But what do you expect from these earnings? Somebody in the comment section was asking about how the recent launch failure is going to affect earnings. I mean, we did speak about it last episode, but we can, like, my question is, what do you want to see in these earnings as an investor? What would confirm your thesis? What is it that would be a thesis breaker for you and make you want to sell? And yeah, what are you looking for?
I think what it was from a gap perspective, I think the 20 to 22% EBITDA margin, I think, is what I was kind of looking for, and also the 30 odd percent. I think from an adjusted basis that removes kind of stock-based compensation. If we're able to get something,
when you say EBITDA, do you mean gross profit?
The gross profit. Sorry, thank you. Yeah,
Okay.
so the gross profit margin. So basically, like, I just want to see that sustains, because as you get further and further into launches and the cadence of further launches, that's just going to be able to offset that selling and general administrative costs, SG&A, more and more and more every single time. So I think that we're at a place where they're continuing to optimize their operating expenditures. It is the day-to-day business and the SG&A costs. And I think if they're able to continue to grow, like we'll talk about with the recent SpaceX launch, they're able to continue to grow, then eventually they'll offset, and they'll get to a point where their cash flow break even, and instead of burning cash, they'll do a better job. I mean, just looking at the cash flow last year comparatively, in the first 6 months comparatively to where they were in the last 6 months, just from operating activities, they burned about $65 million worth of cash the first in terms of just operating. 65 million just in the first 6 months of 2022, and they only burned 31 in the first 6 months of 2023. So I mean, they're moving in the right direction, and if they're able to increase launch cadence and increase the amount of usage and satellites, continue to get deals with NASA, continue to talk about what we're about to talk about with SpaceX, we're not far away from where that operating activities actually starts generating cash and is cash flow break even, and we can actually start stacking cash, whether that's going to be buybacks, whether that's going to be acquiring other space systems bolt-on acquisitions, just like we did in late 2021, early 2022. The sky in space is literally the limit.
Yeah, I was going to say buybacks would be really, really weird because Warren Buffett has this thing that he consulted Steve Jobs when he had a question if they should do buybacks, and one of the question was like, "Do you have enough money for, the considerable future for everything that you want to do?" And
Mhm.
I think that point is very hard for Rocket Lab because we know that they're possibly planning space infrastructure, their own infrastructure, and I think that for them it's going to be very long in the future when
Yeah, it
management
would.
says that, like, we don't know what to do with the money, okay, let's buy back shares. But I think definitely yes, investing back into the business, which is going to be still very good for us as stock investors. I mean, for me, what I'm looking for most in the earnings is actually, because I think that the numbers are going to be whatever they're going to be because of this Electron failure. We already kind of got a preview from them, as for guidance. But what I care about the most is how are they doing on the Neutron development? How is the cash burn being affected? What do they think is the cash needed for finishing Neutron? And are they? It's basically all about Neutron, and I really want to also see their space systems do well. I'm still new to this stock, so I have to research that part well. But I understand that is 66% of their income, and obviously I want that section to be growing very nicely, and want to see the profitability numbers there. Yeah, that's what I would be looking for. uh, then another news that happened this week is SpaceX launched Rocket Lab on a Falcon Heavy. I'm just going to play it because it looks very nice without a sound. I love these rocket launch. Oh, I didn't share it. Did it work now?
No, it's not showing. Yeah, there you go.
Okay, I just reset it to the beginning. I don't know why I love these rocket launches, and I can't freaking wait until Rocket Lab can go back and launch again. By the way, I tried to see if there's any news on what's happening with the recent Electron failure, and I
It's
couldn't
not
find
playing at the
anything.
moment, by the way.
Oh my god, this is
It's okay.
no.
But you were
Here we
saying?
go. No, so that I cannot wait until. Is it not playing when? No, okay,
No,
it's
you're good.
playing. Yeah. So I can't wait until Electron is back and launching and try to find news on what's happening, but it's just crickets. No news on how the investigation is going. Uh, but until then, this is further proof that Rocket Lab is not just a rocket company. You see SpaceX Falcon Heavy launch for NASA, and they launched a satellite that is going to an asteroid that is called Psyche. And the satellite that is going to study this asteroid and is actually going to collect samples and come back down to Earth is powered by Rocket Lab's solar panels. Um, and so basically, even though it was a SpaceX launch, Rocket Lab was still going to space. And why I think it's really funny, because I had a Twitter conversation today about somebody who told me like Rocket Lab was worthless, and then somebody commented below like Rocket Lab is going to the moon, and I was like, this is the actually the only stock where we can say that they really are literally going
Yep.
to the moon.
Venus, Mars, and the moon, and actually
Exactly.
asteroids too, I guess, if you want to say. Yeah,
Exactly. Exactly.
I think people. I don't know why. I think people just push it down, man. I don't know what it is. I mean, I have a lot of people that say it's a meme stock. That and I get it. I think it's very tough to do with any sort of company is to really fully recognize unless they're truly delivering. But I mean, this is just another showcase of how the company is adapting. And literally 2 years ago, we wouldn't have been sitting here talking about something like this. Solera was its own complete entity, and Rocket Lab had the $900 million that they came into after they SPAC'd to be able to acquire. And Solera was one of the first things that they did acquire. It was a bolt-on acquisition, and it's providing extremely efficient solar panels that are paper thin. And that's why you're able to use them on something like a SpaceX. And to think about it, I mean, Elon doesn't just let anybody on his rockets, right? So if it's not tried, true, and tested, I don't think that Elon would jeopardize his missions if he didn't think it was a prudent investment. So
But do you
or a
think
prudent
he had?
operator.
But do you think he had a say? Because as far as I understand, this is on the NASA satellite. You know, so
It
it
could have
was
been
it.
NASA that selected
Yeah.
it. You're right. I mean, but I'm pretty sure that I don't think Elon would have allowed it to happen. But you're right. I mean, it might not have been his
I mean, it's the
call.
same for NASA. Like they wouldn't have allowed it to happen if it was. I mean, this is a very, very, very technical mission. Like it's. Like I mean, to dock and meet up with an asteroid, it's like your margins are, I don't know, less than like razor thin, and then the spaceship having to come back from that to Earth. Uh, I think I don't know if you have like, I guess space is like by default very, very hard, but I think that this is like at the edge of what is possible.
Yeah, I mean, you have to think that a lot of these missions have to be timed at specific times. Like the telemetry has to be there, and if you miss the windows, like just think with like Mars, I think you have to be every 2 years is a 6 month window or something like that you can launch. I messed up the numbers, but you know what I mean. I think it's literally every
No,
two
but it
years.
is it is something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, there is some sort of window, and if you miss it, you have to wait 18 months, right? I mean, it's something like that where you have to recognize that we're not just all floating around the sun in a very succinct manner, right? It's like you're going in 3D. It's like not only is the whole sun and solar system moving in space, but all those things are spinning. It's actually a really cool graphic. I think everyone just looks at it from a bird's eye view and they look about all the planets spinning around, but it's like that's also moving in 3D as well. And so it almost looks like a helix if you look
Yeah,
at
yeah,
what
yeah.
everything that's kind of going on, which is pretty cool. Because I always just envisioned it almost like a 2D movement around the sun. But I mean, I think that this just goes to show how versatile the company is, and I don't think people truly give it the credit it deserves as of yet.
Yeah, and you know, as you said, like for Mars, like the launch window is I don't know if it's 6 months, but it's definitely months. So and then also like if your telemetry is like a little bit off because you know you're aiming for a planet, it's like you can adjust on the way, you know. But like when you need to rendezvous with an asteroid, it's like I don't know what your launch window is and how much you can correct, and especially when you're close to it, like you have to match the exact speed because like Mars like catches you with its gravity, right? But here it's like there's not like there is no gravity that would catch the satellite, so it's yeah, it's insanely hard. So this again proves that NASA wouldn't have chosen this solar solution if it was not a very reliable, super high tech solution.
Okay, yeah, I just pulled it up. So the Mars launch windows, just for example, right? I mean, we're not this Psyche mission isn't necessarily going to Mars. It's going in between a what is it? It's Jupiter and somewhere else, and it's an asteroid between the two. I forget exactly what the Psyche mission is. I remember writing up about it last week, but um, specifically Mars launch windows, just to give people an insight. Let me share this quick, not slides. Share screen. This is kind of what it refers to. So you have Q3 2020, Q3 2022, Q4
Oh, sorry,
2024,
I add you
um,
now to the.
and then Q4 2026, and then it starts to kind of change up. Um, and you can see it's depending on what month you're looking at. It could be several different windows, but it's pretty interesting to kind of look at. And you have to think about not just Mars, but all the other different planets that you might be looking at, Venus or Jupiter or all these things, because we're all just moving around the sun in different intervals and different distances. So the telemetry has to be there. Otherwise, you might run out of fuel, or you might not be able to. And that was part of the cool thing that we were talking about, I don't know if it was Capstone or if it was one of the more recent um, launches that Rocket Lab had for NASA, which was to try to estimate and get the telemetry down for when they do finally return back to the moon. And they basically were testing putting satellites around, not only circulating around the Earth, but then eventually spinning so fast outside of Earth's orbit that it would eventually go to the moon and then start doing the same around the moon. Because that's what a lot of these things do. You have to think, you have to use so much speed to get out of, and I'm not a aeronautical or aerospace engineer by any means, so I'm going to mess up when I say this. So don't crucify me. But the you have to utilize the gravity of whatever object you're floating around to be able to slow down and eventually go into their orbit and land. There's no air brakes on a lot of these things. So you have to recognize that that's how a lot of these things are going to be captured. So if you go to Mars, you're probably going to have to circulate Mars once or twice, or maybe even a few times before you actually land, because you have to travel at such a vast speed. At the moment, it's going to take, I don't know, 6 months in a vessel to get to Mars. So in order to get there, you have to be traveling at thousands upon thousands of miles an hour. Um, so if not tens of
Tens of
thousands of miles an
thousands.
hour.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you can't just slow down on a dime. You have to use
Yeah.
Mars's orbit to be able to get captured
But
into its orbit.
what's really scary is when humans go there, it's like if anything happens, because the launch window is every 2 years. So let's say that you leave, and then I don't know, something comes up like, oh, we didn't pack enough food or water, or oh, this system doesn't work. It's like the next time you have a chance of getting resupplied is in 2 years, which is a really, really, you're really on your own there.
Yeah, it's like a Matt Damon movie or something.
Yeah, exactly.
No, bad joke, bad joke.
It's a good joke. It's exactly like that. So, yeah, and actually, this week there has been a really good tweet that I saw by a guy who knows a lot about Rocket Lab. You maybe know him, and he collected up, the different missions and different areas that Rocket Lab is involved in. And here is the tweet. It's done by a guy called Matt Farley. Do you happen to know him?
I may know that guy.
You may know that guy. Okay, good.
Yeah.
So I thought it was a really good tweet because it goes over the different kind of missions and what Rocket Lab is involved in. And keep in mind, guys, this is 66% of the income. Do you want to quickly go through this list and maybe talk about the missions on it?
For sure. I mean, I didn't really do too much, right? It was just basically going onto their website. I have the source at the bottom of this tweet, and it was basically just going in there to help people understand that it's more than just a launch company, and looking at all the different opportunities and avenues where Rocket Lab is playing playing a role in a lot of these things. So I didn't even realize that the Psyche mission was happening this quick. I thought it was going to be something that was done in 24, 25, but here we are knocking something out very quickly. So Solero is obviously the solar panels that go onto a lot of the satellites, whether it's a photon satellite or other. But then there's also the global constellation that is in partnership with Apple, and so that was part of like $140 million contract, at which Rocket Lab was able to get a little bit of as well. You have Blue Ghost, which is being part of the moon lander that I think Firefly is putting up there.
To the moon.
The Rocket Lab to the moon, exactly. And so that they're going to help with providing some of the software associated with that. You have Varda
What
Space.
does Apple do?
Sorry, go ahead.
On Apple, like, why is Apple launching satellites? Is it just for the satellite calls on the latest?
I forget. All I remember is that it was a really big deal, and everyone was just like, "Oh my god, I can't believe Globalstar is like." Well, Globalstar is just like a contractor that's going to be contracting 2 other companies to really fulfill. So I think I'm not exactly sure how the deal is really structured, but it'll help with respect to just being able to use Rocket Lab. I don't know. Can you scroll up to it? I forget what it is. I think it's one of the first ones, but I think it's either they're using Rocket Lab satellites or they're utilizing
here, Globalstar.
17 spacecraft is for low Earth orbit. Lead the development of the spacecraft buses. Let's just see. Satellites development of the payload and final
It doesn't
satellite
even
assembly.
mention Apple here.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing. It's just like when Globalstar got the contract, I was pretty excited because I knew that Rocket Lab was in communication with Globalstar for something, and it wasn't really known what it was, and it was eventually found out to be the Apple deal, which is pretty cool. But Varda is pretty cool as well. That's creating and utilizing photon satellites to be able to be basically little zero G labs that can help with creation of future drugs, cables, pharmaceuticals, semiconductors that require zero G to be made in specific environments.
I'm very
So
excited about that one.
yeah,
Actually,
that one they did their first launch and it was successful, and so they have 3 more, and I'm sure with success, if Varda is able to kind of continue on down that path, then I'm sure that you'll see another consistent revenue stream kind of coming in where, you know, that'll expand, right? Because that was kind of the proof of concept was that first. And I don't know what if it was fully successful. The launch was successful. The bringing of, I think, the photon and the experiment, I think, was successful. Whether or not they were able to bring it down safely, that's where I kind of lose translation. I haven't researched, but that might be able to be found on the Varda
yeah. I
discussion
mean,
itself.
one use case that I know is this. I saw a video on it like many years ago, but basically these undersea internet cables, as far as I understand, like they're made from a very specific, is it carbon or that is basically like super expensive to produce. And somehow, like in zero G, when you make this material, it's like it naturally aligns in a way that is good for these internet cables, and it basically becomes cheaper to produce. And this material is so expensive that even though it takes tens of thousands of dollars per kilo to go up to space and retrieve it, it still makes economic sense to make it in zero G. And that is very exciting, because we know that phase 3 of Rocket Lab is that they want that space infrastructure. And this could be, you know, like operating these space factories could be their version of Starlink.
Mhm. Yeah, very true. And then there wasn't too much else. I mean, I think they have methane satellites for NASA, and I think they have um, Escapade, which is going to Mars, and there's Venus, and a few other things in there as well. But it just goes to show you how many different things that they kind of have their fingers in, and not only that, but all these different companies that are either already established or are on behalf of. I think there was also a Japanese um, satellite that they're going to be putting into space here rather soon, and a few other things in here as well. That just goes to show you how many different countries, how many different entities, how many different partnerships that they're truly coming forward with to be able to help continue the growth trajectory of this company. And a lot of other companies are not, unfortunately, in the same financial footing. And so what happens when those companies go belly up? Will those companies that are in the backlog of them eventually come over to say Rocket Lab? And that's really where I'm kind of looking for, is that continued backlog of opportunities for Rocket Lab to continue down.
I'm very curious. I found a video about Astra, because they are a company that we both are suspecting is going to go bankrupt soon. And I saw a video with the basically the CEO of Astra interview about the future of Astra, and it's 1 month old. And it's a 1 hour interview, and I listened to it, and I was actually impressed by the CEO. And I got this, like, that they might somehow pull through this, because yeah, I don't know if you saw this interview or how much you know about Astra.
I know a little bit, but they're talking really good game. What I have yet to see is execution.
Yeah, I
And
mean
so,
that was also clear from his interview that they're focusing on reliability.
mhm,
But his point was more that uh, they invested into a rocket factory. He was also making this point that it's very different to design a rocket with a group of engineers, where you live and breathe when you're a very small company, and you like the whole team lives and breathes the rocket. And then when you try to go into mass production, and then the engineers sit here and they engineer the rocket, and then another team manufactures it, and then another team puts the rocket together, and then another team launches it, and then you kind of lose, because like if it's only one team, then they know, oh, if the rocket does this, I just need to tighten this screw and it like fixes this problem. And you lose this when you start to have this big team. And he said that they have a very efficient factory, which I mean, it was there, right? And they need to fix the reliability. But he said that it's really important somehow for the army to be able to, or the US government to be able to rapidly design and launch. And, like if they have an idea, like, oh, we need to see this and let's put something up in space. And he was sort of insinuating that like maybe that will pull them through. And then they have a lot of like milestones based contracts. And the interviewer asked him like, aren't you running out of money, and what's your handling on it? And he basically said that, yeah, we're very low on money, and number one focus is move on the milestones, because he thinks that that's the best way to get paid, is like deliver products to customers. And I was like, wow, it doesn't sound like this scammy specky startup. I mean, that's true, like that is the best way. And then the getting money from the investors, it was like third or fourth on his list. Like it was other solutions, like how he would and one red flag for me when I was reading their quarterly earnings is they said that we are evaluating opportunities, right? And then the way I translated that is like, we're trying not to go bankrupt, and if somebody wants to acquire us, then we're open, but he basically went into it that it's not what he meant. What he meant was that they are looking for partnerships with different other space companies, and they have um, a lot of factory production, because their thesis to start the company was that with scale you will be cheap,
mhm,
and to get to scale they had to invest into the factories, and then they're very rapidly able to produce like rockets and rocket parts. And he said that if somebody needs like a certain rocket parts, then they're able to make that, or if somebody needs tanks, like they're able to make that. And I was like, yeah, he's the talk was definitely very good.
mhm.
And it just remains to be seen if they do manage
I
to
don't
pull through it.
disbelieve that the factory, because I watched the same uh, video that you did with respect to walking through the factory and all the different things that kind of transpire and how they get there and offload their metal and how they kind of reshape it. And so I don't doubt that. I don't doubt the capability of the factory. What I do doubt is, like, when are they actually going to start selling some of these things? Because in Q2 and in Q3 will be very telling, right? Like you said, some of these companies will get milestone payments. Like I know Rocket Lab got milestone payments from Space Force when they hit a certain milestone with respect to, I forget what it was, but maybe with Neutron, I think it was. So once Neutron hit a certain milestone, they got a payment from Space Force to be able to continue to go, which is kind of cool, right? You get a $15 million payment or something like that. So if you're able to prove the same with Astra, maybe you get some small payments here, small payments there, that helps offset a quarter's worth of cash flow or something of the like. But I mean, the problem that I still see is they went from Q1 of this year having zero revenue to Q2 having like $2 or $3 million worth of revenue. The amount
Yeah,
of people that they have supplied in that factory alone is just astronomical. So while I agree that they're trying their best, I just don't understand how they're going to turn around the company without substantial backing. But that said, if people do view them as a vital piece to the
exactly,
puzzle,
exactly.
people will pay to keep them in business. Whether that's NASA, whether that's other companies, I don't really know exactly who is
Yeah,
banking on them
yeah, I
to
mean, look,
truly
there's
succeed.
there is 250 and counting rocket startups, as far as I know, that is trying to get something in space. And out of those, there is 4 or 5 that have managed to send something up in space, and Astra is one of them. And they were actually the ones that managed to do it in the shortest amount of time, and maybe that's why the machine is so unreliable, because they rushed through a lot of things. But that maybe I didn't communicate it good enough, but that was exactly my point, that because it's so special, that it's so few companies that make it, that they can go to space. And NASA's policy is that they want competition. So it, like, I guess they don't care if the 250th or the 200th startup is trying to make a rocket and then they fail and they go bankrupt. But here you're talking about a company that has made a factory, has launched satellites. I think it's like 22 satellites or something that they have launched into space. And like, from that viewpoint, like, they would be a company that is on this edge of maybe worth saving, because they are so many more milestones ahead of everyone else. But who knows?
They're stuck between a rock and a hard place with Astra, because and like I said, I'm not fully educated on this, but they've decommissioned their third rocket style, and they've moved to a fourth rocket style, which they have a couple mock-ups of their fourth rocket. Whether or not they're actually demos or whether or not they're actually capable of flying, I do not know. But the fact that they haven't launched that yet, the fourth rocket, and here we are now 10 months into 2023, and they have yet to put a rocket into space. They're going back in terms of their pace. So they were able to get rockets starting, I think it was in 2020 or 2021, up into space, but they haven't really launched many in latter half of 22 and throughout 2023, and they don't have one planned at the moment. And so how you can really put yourself in a space where, and to me, it's, I think, a 30 to 40 million dollar company as the market places them. To me, what I look at it is somebody's going to eventually take it over. Unless something drastic happens, like a SpaceX comes in and helps provide them with, for cheap parts or something like that. But to me, why help a company if the value of that factory is probably worth, 100, if not several $100 million, just based off of what I saw? Why let it succeed if you could pick it up for pennies on the dollar? Just like with what Rocket Lab did with Virgin Orbit. I mean, it doesn't make sense to save Virgin Orbit. You're burning so much cash. Pick it up for pennies on the dollar when they go to bankruptcy court. That's what I think is going to happen, unless somebody comes in and saves the day, or they do actually start to execute. And I recognize that factory is very capable, but are people actually buying what they're selling? And I guess that truly is what's important. I mean, it's going to require a lot of turnaround. I mean, you're going to have to see, to me, to be somewhat even think that they're moving in the right direction, their revenue this quarter is going to have to be in the tens of $15 million, whereas last quarter they were at 2 or 3 million. So that's going to be a drastic change in the amount of revenue.
But how can their revenue be in the tens of millions if they're not launching, right? Like, that's or they have also a space service.
I think they started to go from not strictly launch, but they were selling launch to, when they decommissioned the third rocket model that they had, they decided to start selling space engines and stuff of the like for, I think it's like, I don't know if it was going back to the Army or the Department of Defense, but I think that's what they moved to. They started to move to, instead of making rocket engines, they're going to be engines for all purpose, right? And so that they could be that on demand. And so that when they started getting revenue last quarter, that's what they were getting, was, I think, just selling their engines. And so they were talking about how they're going to sell hundreds of engines a quarter, eventually be selling thousands of engines a year. And whether or not they're on pace to actually do something like that, I don't know. I know that they're there. I know that the rocket factory is real. The factory that they're assembling things is real. They have a mock-up of their the Astra 4 rocket. I just don't see how, where they are today, without having a launch tested Astra 4 rocket, a decommissioned Astra 3 rocket, and with very few sales of their rocket engines, will they be able to survive? But they might get to a place where Lockheed or somebody gives them a couple $100 million just to stay in business because their engines are quick to produce. But
Yeah.
I don't see it at the moment.
Yeah, that is going to be one of the, I mean, not exciting, that's the best word, but not a good word for this, but yeah, it is going to be something that will unfold in 2023 and 2024. And I'm very curious to see what is the resolution. Obviously, I wish them the best and the employees. And yeah. I have a comment here. Vince, have you taken a position in the company yet? And I'm going to take a freaking very small position just to be able to say that I have shares in the company. I'm a real estate developer, and all my money is currently in real estate. And as you know, all over the planet, the real estate is not the hottest business to be in right now, and not the fastest moving liquid place to be right now. If I could sell the things that I want to sell, I would want to build a position in Rocket Lab in the six figures, um, or like just around $100,000, like into Rocket Lab. And I might just buy like 10 shares or something. So I can report to you guys that I have stocks now in Rocket Lab, but yeah, so that's the honest answer to that question.
Yeah, I definitely. I'm looking to add more. I think where I'm at though is I'm okay with the position size that I have. If things continue to go down the right direction and the price stays this cheap, I'll probably be adding more as well.
Yeah.
My position isn't nearly $100,000. I think that would 3,000 or so shares. I think that would be maybe more. No, 30,000 shares. 30,000 shares.
Yeah.
I don't have nearly that much. I think I have like 12 or $13,000 worth. I think I have 2,500 shares or something like that. So yeah, I would love to get to a position where I could afford 100,000, and I guess I technically could, but just for the risk, and I'm sure down the road, if things continue to succeed, I'll be like, you know what, I shouldn't have been such a scaredy cat and risk off. I should have been more willing to take a chance, because to be honest, if this does succeed, Rocket Lab specifically, and it does go to a 20 or a $50 billion company, I mean, it's going to be, a easy 5x to 10x, if not more. I get my market caps. Is this a $2 billion market cap at the moment, or is it 3 billion? I forget.
No, two.
So if it goes to 20,
if we go lower, maybe not even two.
Yeah. So I mean, if it goes to 20 billion, you're looking at a 10x, and SpaceX, which obviously is years ahead where Rocket Lab is comparatively to launch cadence and the ability to launch big payloads, right? You have to think they're able to launch bigger payloads. Their frequency is much more, so they're kind of in a different magnitude of valuation, which is evident by SpaceX being $150 billion kind of valuation. But even if you were to get a fraction of that, and the magnitude goes from 2 billion to 15 billion or 20 billion, that's still a 8 to 10x on the organization. And so I think that this has running room, and considering these guys are very close behind in several years, I'm sure they'll be launching 50 to 100 rockets a year. So just like SpaceX, like they don't even announce things ahead of time. They might announce the big stuff like, hey, we're going to Mars, or hey, we're launching the Starship or something like that. But when it comes to Falcon 9, they just do it. They're just on such a cadence that it's not even a big deal anymore. And it's getting to that point almost with Rocket Lab where you're getting a launch per month, or sometimes, launch every couple of weeks. So eventually it's going to get to the point where it's every week and they're launching something. They have 3 different pads. So it's going to be cool.
Yeah, and you see, the funny thing is that if they just find a way on the space infrastructure, I think that in itself will be a 10x.
Yeah.
Like from basically, like, they announce what it is, and then based on what has happened to Starlink, so that's like a call option on the stock, because yeah, it can 10x in itself just on the rocket launches, as you said, and on the space services that they're doing. And then on top of it, if they make an internet constellation or whatever constellation, and it's a good working concept, that in itself is just going to give a 10x. But regarding this portfolio size, I just want to speak about my philosophy on this, because uh, I think that you're doing very, very good, because there is, different investors, and everybody, like there's not a one size fits all, and as far as I understand, like you're doing very, very well on having a very high income. And when you have a very high income, you can invest more safely, and even a smaller return, like ends up compounding to be a very, very big return. And what I mean by this is, let's say to reach $1 million, you either invest a lot of money on a small return, or you invest small money and get big return. Like that's the two levers that you can play with, and obviously the best way to play with is, you earn a very high income, like let's say you're a doctor or an engineer or whatever, and then you earn like six figures or multiple six figures, and then you can invest six figures. Let's say that you're earning 200,000 a year, and you're able to invest 100,000 a year, which is probably not possible because taxes and blah blah blah, but just theoretically. And even if you just invest into the S&P 500, guaranteed you're going to have a lot of money by the time you need it. I mean, even within a few years, you're going to have a lot of money. But for, let's say, a person who doesn't have such a high income, then one way that they can compensate is that they, study a lot about stocks, and, they go into stock picking. But yeah, I think it's very unrealistic to think that you can, like you can have better returns than Warren Buffett or something. Like this is something
Right.
that I see, that you have these young kids who come into the market and they're like, 30%, you only made 30% in a year.
Mm-hmm.
Fuck that. I can trade options and do this, and I will have easily 80%. And it's like they think that they will do better than Warren Buffett, which is completely unrealistic. But all you need is just a couple of points more than the S&P 500, and you will be golden, right?
Right.
And my point is that if I go into, like, my investment philosophy is, I want to only buy stocks. I don't want to invest into investment index funds. I want to concentrate my investments into companies that I know and I have researched and I have a very high conviction in, and maybe have, let's say 10 companies, and I want to invest a position size which is like this, around 100,000 into each company.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why I want to do it like that is because I know that some of them will be wrong, right? But if, let's say, one of them ends up 10xing or 100xing, it becomes a very, very meaningful investment that is really life changing, and future changing. And
Mm-hmm.
I had a colleague that I was speaking with, and she was investing into Bitcoin, and then I asked, like, why are you investing into Bitcoin? Yeah, because I believe that it's going to do this, and I asked, like, how much is your investment? And she's like, yeah, I want to keep it safe, so I only invested $300. And I was like, $300? Like, why the F are you even doing it? Even if it's going like 100x, which, by the way, she invested at, like, I don't know, when Bitcoin was like 20,000. So I'm like, even if it goes to 2 million, which is like very, very highly unlikely, you only have $30,000. Like, why even do it? Like,
Mm-hmm.
it
Mm-hmm.
cannot. I just don't see the logic in that. And this is why it's my investment strategy. I want to, study a company, go balls deep into it, and go with a very substantial amount of money in it, so that if it becomes correct, like the thesis is correct, it's really life changing.
Mm-hmm. I would say, yeah, I like where you said. I think it's just from a different perspective. I always on my channel, when I talk about cash flow chronicles and I stream, Tuesday through Thursday or whatever, I always kind of preach, and whether it's just normal videos on my channel that I've been doing for 5-6 years, it's like I always talk about the 5 key things, right? About objective, time horizon, risk tolerance, how active or passive you want to be, and how much money you can add to the portfolio. And when you kind of do a range of all those different things, you'll kind of come to something that works out for you. So if you're somebody that doesn't want to do any intense research. Like this,
Yeah,
let's just say, for example, you happen to stumble across this Rocket Lab Weekly #2, and you don't ever plan to look at Rocket Lab ever again, then it probably doesn't make sense for you to truly have an investment in Rocket Lab, because it could very well be that something turns up in the next quarter or two where I'm like, I don't like that at all. That's completely different than the fundamental thesis of why I invested in the company. They could say something like, we're strictly going to go back to only launch, or, you know, something like that, where I'm just like, oh shit, like this is different, right? And if you don't do that research, or you're not up to date on it, something can really get away from you in quite quick amount of time. So what I just like to think, I like to, like where your head is at, Vince, I like to say, like, what's the easiest way? If you say your goal is to get to $1,000,000 and you have $1,000 today, what's the easiest way to have the amount of effort that you need? And that's just to add another $1,000 to the portfolio. Because if you add $1,000 and you want to go to 1,000,000, you have to basically 1,000 extra money to be able to get to $1,000,000. If you add another $1,000, you have $2,000. You only have to 500 extra money, and it's a lot easier to 500 extra money than it is to 1,000 extra money. And so it goes back to the very consistent approach of what you're talking about. But also, I like what you said with respect to, you know, kind of being realistic and being like, well, if I want to get to a certain position size, or I honestly think that this is going to 10x, it's like, well, don't put $100 into it, right? If you think it's going to 10x and you think it has decent risk, and that risk is something you'll be watching over time, you know, and you're doing your due diligence, then, you know,
that lessens the risk, right? So it's like, you know, people talk about that. Yeah, this stock is a very speculative investment. Yes, but if you put in the time to research and do your due diligence, it actually pulls down the risk. It's very risky, as you said, when you watch episode 2 of Rocket Lab Weekly and you say, I'm going all in, and then you never follow it up ever again, then it's very, very risky.
So, I mean, the way I look at it now is very much like you said. I used to do stuff like, oh, I want to do day trading and stuff of the like. And I do still sell options to an extent, but that's just more for positioning rather than like daily profits, if that makes sense. So the way I used to look at it was back in 2021 specifically, I really came to this conclusion where I was like trying to day trade, and I was trying to get $10 here and $15 there. And sometimes I'd go into the market and I'd be able to make a couple $100 that day, or I'd lose a couple $100 that day. And it was like, well, you know, what can I guarantee? It's like, if I'm going to spend a couple hours, you know, and the reason I had extra time just because I was at home, right? Everybody was working from home during that time period. And the reason why that I was just like, this is silly, is because I couldn't tell you if I worked a couple hours that day and I was going to make money or lose money. But what I could guarantee is I have a side business where if I put in a couple hours worth of work, I can make $500. Sometimes I can make up to $2,000. So it's like, well, what's more important to me? Is putting my money in the S&P 500 and just letting that do its thing more important, because I have the majority of my wealth is kind of doing its thing, and I can add, say, $500 to $2,000 if I do something that day and put it over into the S&P 500 and just let it do its thing? Or me trying to make $20 here, $20 there, lose $30 here by day trading, really the most prudent way. And so I recognized, was like, for me, I could guarantee make money doing one thing. I couldn't guarantee the other. So I'm just going to park my money in the S&P 500 and then look for companies like I do today that are either just about to get to profitability, that have not exorbitant, but what's the word I'm looking for? A much larger potential to return than the S&P 500, and I'll take a small portion of the portfolio and be sure I do the research, right? When people talk like, oh, you should invest in HIMS, you should invest in this, it's like, I can only look at so many different companies. So I can only be diligent about watching Rocket Lab and Palantir and what's the other one? Dutch Bros now. So it's like, I there's the ones that I'm like, I feel confident, I see them growing. Dutch Bros, for example, I have a buddy who does construction, and they're bidding out different contracts for building Dutch Bros in Florida and Virginia. And you're just sitting there like, oh shit, like these guys haven't even opened up stores in those locations, but here they are building them. You're like, okay, so they're expanding, they're continuing to grow into different markets. And so you start to deprioritize, and you're like, well, they're obviously not going to compete with Starbucks. It's like, well, they obviously are, because they're building in Florida, Virginia, and they've spanned across the entirety of the United States. So you start to be able to mitigate some of those risks instead of just being like on the blanket. You're like push it off and shrug it off. Be like, no, Starbucks is going to eat their lunch. They're not going to make any money, you know. But meanwhile, you look and they're more profitable on a store by store basis than Starbucks is, and their gross profit margins are better too. So you start to think, you're like, oh shit. I mean, they might not have as many products, but they also have the opportunity to not have 30,000 stores of their own that they're competing against, right? They have what, 700 stores. So if you get to, or maybe it's less than that, but regardless, it's like, you know, that there's opportunity there. So anyway, that's just how I structure my portfolio. Like you said, I have a high income job. So, and then I have a decent side hustle if I ever want to. So for me, it just makes sense to put the majority of my money in the S&P or equivalent and find those things that I think can truly move the dial, which for me, you know, I like Google, Amazon, Rocket Lab, Palantir, Dutch Bros, and that's pretty much it. Everything else that I invest in is either just to get a little bit more dividend or because I think it's going to be maybe less volatile or a very good component of the S&P 500, like NextEra Energy, for example. I thought it was a good opportunity to buy into NextEra in the most recent couple of weeks as it dropped in price. And with that, you know, I think it's going to match, if not exceed slightly, the S&P 500 and pay a slightly better dividend. So anyway, that's just where I come from when investing.
Yeah, cool. I mean, this is what makes the market, you know, like all these people with their different opinions, and sometimes you agree, sometimes you disagree. But if everybody would agree, you wouldn't have a stock market. You would only have buyers, or you would only have sellers. So
right.
Yeah. And regarding Rocket Lab, I think that we got a boost in the beginning of the week because I think Rocket Lab was grouped into maybe the defense contractors. And then we crashed sorry?
Well, I was going to say which it is. I mean, they have the haste now, which is suborbital. So with that, you can kind of think about being able to provide rockets or missiles to anybody who's a defense contractor. So
my only question is what caused the drop because Thursday I think was an 8% drop. Was looking for news everywhere. I mean, I'm because I'm planning to buy the stock. I'm very happy for the discount. And if I look technically, let me just share. It's shared, right?
It's coming. There it is.
Yeah. So if we technically analyze the stock, there is a very, very heavy support line here in the 380s. And based on how we're going, it could be possible that we go down there. I would be very, very surprised if we would go below this support line. So in this region where we are, it's very, very safe to add to your position because, you have very little downside technically. Doesn't always work. But what do you think is, I mean, I know I asked you in the beginning, but it's still because I feel like the company is doing really good. It was grouped in the defense contractor section, and then the market changed its mind a few days after. And it's kind of weird because it feels like the company is doing good. They're, getting contracts, they're executing, and then the stock is just going the other way.
I mean, they're in bad company, right? It's a bad sector. I mean, that's the way I kind of look at it is you don't have many other stocks that have either survived or are on the brink of really creating a lot of value in the space. And so you look at Astra, that's pretty much belly up. You look at Velo 3D, which is another, they don't launch anything, but they help provide space systems and 3D printing materials to people that could. And that's, they're on life support. Relativity hasn't launched anything in 2023. So it's really, if you think about it, unfortunately, if automakers do well, even if GM or Ford are doing well, they're going to get dragged down just because of the sector that they're in. And so you might have somebody that shines bright.
So this is like a huge buying opportunity in another word, like
I don't know. I wouldn't say. I mean, I think it all depends on what people are into and where the risk tolerance is. If they want to see a little bit of risk come off the table beforehand, like they want to see what happens with 3Q, and they want to make sure that they get back to launching the Electron before they invest, then I can completely understand that. Um, I think that there's probably still some skittishness about the fact that it's been almost 3 weeks or so since that failed
Yeah,
launched, and we haven't really
that's
heard
true.
anything.
That's true.
So they said that the details will be out shortly, about a week or so ago, and have yet to kind of provide full context on that. I'm fairly confident that everything will be fine. I mean, they've launched successful launches, 38 out of
41.
40 something times. So,
Yeah.
with that, I think that you'll get back to flying again and being okay. But I think people have a right to, either, if they want to guarantee, what you can guarantee is the price is what the price is today, which is what I always say. But I've a fairly good feeling that it's not going to be going to the moon or Mars or rocket to Venus anytime soon from a stock price perspective. And so if people want to eliminate some of their risk,
so you're saying the company will get to the moon before the stock gets to the moon?
I don't know. I had to double check when they're actually planning on doing the Blue Ghost lander, but I think that there's a few points between now and next June, the end of 2Q next year, where you kind of need to get a little bit further and closer to break even cash flow. And I don't foresee any big catalysts unless they get a huge contract with, I don't know, SpaceX, or another contract with NASA or Space Force or something of the like that can guarantee the backlog. I think that what you're going to end up seeing in the short term, the next 2 quarters, is more turmoil for the sector, which I think could even have a possibility of dragging down the stock more. If Astra goes belly up, okay, Rocket Lab might be in a place to acquire out of bankruptcy court some of their things.
But you see,
it's a bad company.
Yeah, let's say Astra goes bankrupt, right? So that's bad for the sector. But then all the contracted Astra launches will probably go over to Rocket Lab, which is very good for Rocket Lab. Yep. Rocket Lab can probably buy their machines for pennies on the dollar, which is, again, really good for Rocket Lab. So that would be sort of a fantastic buying opportunity if the stock would be dragged down because of Astra's bankruptcy. But yeah, we have to see how the market would react to that.
So I'm more of a person that I'm okay if I lose some money. Like if I lose 12 grand, it's not going to be a big deal to me. It could be a lot to somebody else. So I think if somebody wants to wait a little bit and get the stock when it's at $4 or $5, but some of the risk has been truly mitigated, I think that that's okay. Because if you honestly think that it's still going to go to $20 billion market cap, or 50 or $100 billion market cap, then what's really the difference if you buy at $3 versus $4 or $5? And it's not going to be that much, right? I mean, the market cap could move pretty much, I obviously by 20-30% if you're going from $3 to $4 to $5. But so you might have 20 or 30% less shares. But if that means that you're guaranteeing your investment a little bit more, or you're more comfortable with the risk that you're taking on more by waiting, and you still think it's going to get to 50 to $100 billion market cap, that's okay. And I think that a lot of people don't view things like that. I've recognized that risk is almost the one of the key things that people need to recognize, when I think a lot of times people will they're like, oh, it's got a 50 to 100x opportunity, let me put money into it. It's like, well, shit, I could tell you 80 different things off the top of my mind that can make you 80 to 100x your money, but are they actually going to work out? You kind of have to thread the needle.
All the specs in 2021, and almost all of them are like 90% down. That's like
exactly. And this
probably
is one
Palantir or something.
This is technically one of them, right? I mean, the Vector Acquisition Group came on at $10. I think when it de-SPACed, it was actually $10.80 or something like that, and it's down out in the $3 to $4 range. So This one I think is one that I always thought was going to come and pull through. SoFi is another one I think that's going to pull through. But not all of them will. But it's going to require time and patience and people
and DCA.
And DCA, and I think a lot of people just need to recognize like what game they're in. Are they looking for making 100% overnight? Well, that's going to be tough. Versus if you're patient, then I think that this could be a good company, especially if you have 7, 8, 10 years on your hands. I think by 2030, we're going to be talking about a completely different company. It's going to have Neutron. It might be actually launching people into space. I mean, there's a lot of opportunity that I think is still to come with this foundation that Rocket Lab is building.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I think that this was a fantastic episode. Thank you so much for today, Matt.
No, thanks for inviting me, man.
Yeah, and thanks for everybody who showed up. Make sure that you subscribe to the channel, and I put Matt's channel and Twitter in the description box so you can follow him on Twitter. And looking forward to doing this again next week.
Thank you, brother. I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah. All right. Ciao, ciao.
Cheers.